everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first event of our Walk the Talk Forum Series 2021, Unveiling Ageism, Elder Abuse and Rights in the Age of COVID-19. My name is Bev Lang and I'm the Executive Officer of Elder Abuse Action Australia. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional and original owners of the Darkinjung land on which I am today. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Elder Abuse Action Australia was established in 2018 as a national peak organisation funded by the Australian Government through the Attorney General's Department to respond to and prevent elder abuse. Our aims are to address the abuse of older people and protect the rights of older Australians by drawing on expertise across our networks within government, community and business sectors. In 2019, at the 6th National Elder Abuse Conference, EAAA announced it would organise all future national conferences in partnership with local organisations. The EAAA board considers the conference an essential element of our mission to be a national voice to eliminate abuse of older people. The National Elder Abuse Conference is the only one of its type that addresses specifically elder abuse in Australia. And in 2022, the conference will be held in Tasmania for the first time. Conference will build on the successes of past conferences and to share the stories and experiences of older people, exchange the latest research and evidence from both a national and international perspective, highlight programs and responses being delivered in Australia and overseas, and to engage a diverse audience to participate in eradicating elder abuse. The next conference will be held on the 14th and 15th of February in 2022 in Hobart, and we're thrilled to be partnering with CODA Tasmania. CODA Tasmania is the peak body for older people in Tasmania and has been the voice of older Tasmanians for more than 50 years. I'd like to acknowledge the important contribution and great work of the Conference Program Committee, who are experts across diverse sectors and working towards ending elder abuse. The Walk the Talk conference is uniquely placed to examine the confluence of factors that allow us to both examine the impact of COVID-19 on older people, consider the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety, challenge our preconceptions with the release of the prevalence study a little bit later this year, and comprehend the impact outlined in the economic cost of elder abuse. In many ways, the whole Walk the Talk Forum series was born out of COVID-19 because we would have already held the conference without it coming into our view. It would have been in February this year. When the pandemic happened, we knew we would have to postpone it, but were determined to keep faith with delegates from previous conferences, as well as spreading the word to new audiences by organising a series of forums such as this one. Another reason these forums are so important and so timely is 2021 begins the World Health Organisation's Decade of Healthy Ageing and the United Nations Decade of Action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. Some of our speakers today will reflect upon this in their talks. The Walk the Talk Forum series is the beginning of vitally important conversations that will continue through the year and particularly in depth at the conference next year. And I'm very pleased to announce that we'll be calling for abstracts for the conference from the 8th of March this year. We'll be posting details in all the usual places as well as the conference website, the details of which we'll share with you after the forum. All presentations today are pre-recorded and we'll conclude with a live Q&A with most of our panel members. Unfortunately, Professor John Baird is in Geneva and the time difference makes it impossible for him to participate in person. We hope he'll be with us live in Hobart at the conference. And before we start, some housekeeping information. Should you need any technical assistance during the forum, just click the live support red person icon in the top right-hand corner of your screen to chat with one of our support team. That it will be monitored throughout the forum. And the Q&A feature is available on your screen as well for your questions. We'd love to hear from you throughout the forum. Feel free to ask questions via that particular box And if it's possible, we'll answer those questions through the course of the forum. Otherwise, we'll compile responses and distribute at a later date. As usual in these kinds of events, please be as concise as possible and respect the different points of view that will unquestionably be presented through the course of this forum. And if you have any particular questions for Professor Baird, we will email them out of session and distribute his response. I'm very pleased to say we have 5 excellent speakers today, and I'm just going to introduce them one by one now, and then we'll get into presenting their videos in a moment or two. Sarah Bolt is going to be our first speaker. Sarah is Tasmania's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner. Her career is marked by change and diversity. Sarah moved into the world of social justice with the Equal Opportunity Commission South Australia from private legal practice. Inspired by an extremely hot Adelaidean summer came a change in professional direction. Station leader at Antarctica's Mawson Station. In 2005, Sarah was appointed Anti-Discrimination Commissioner in Tasmania, to which she was reappointed in 2017, after a period as the Police Ombudsman in South Australia. Welcome, Sarah, and we look forward to hearing from you in a moment or two. Ian Yates, AM. Ian is the Chief Executive Officer of CODA Australia. Ian serves on a wide variety of federal government and aged care sector national bodies. He's also a member of the Consumer Advisory Panel to the Australian Securities Investments Commission, a director of Livable Housing Australia, and a member of the advisory board of the ARC Centre of Excellence in Population Ageing Research. He is a former Deputy Chancellor of Flinders University. Professor John Beard. John is a professor at the University of New South Wales and works globally with academia, policymakers, and the private sector to reimagine the second half of life. He is a commissioner with the US National Academy of Medicine Commission on healthy longevity, and from 2009 to 2019 led the WHO's work on ageing. The Honourable Dr K Patterson AO. Dr Patterson is Australia's Age Discrimination Commissioner. Prior to her appointment on 29 July 2016, she taught allied health science at university and went on to develop Victoria's first postgraduate diploma in gerontology and to introduce gerontology into undergraduate courses. Her strong interests in issues affecting older Australians continued following her election to the Senate in 1987 and later appointment to the Cabinet in 2001. She is currently Director of the Brockhoff Foundation and Honorary Professorial Fellow at Monash University. Dr Kiran Raberu. Dr Raberu is Chair of the Steering Committee for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, a network of over 380 members from over 80 countries worldwide. GARP seeks a world in which older people live free from discrimination and are able to fully enjoy their rights. Among many other prestigious appointments, Dr Raberu is a full professor of psychiatry at the University of Ottawa, a geriatric psychiatrist at the Ottawa Hospital, and chair of the board of the International Longevity Centre. We were hoping to hear from Professor De Leo today, but unfortunately he's living in Italy at the moment and is unwell, and despite his enthusiasm, could not be with us today. He sends his apologies and we wish him well for a speedy recovery. So now for the first of our speakers or videos, I'd like to introduce Tasmania's Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, Sarah Bolt, who will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the rights of older Australians in residential aged care.
From the outset, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to present this important forum. The more vibrant and creative mind will grow old, hero or villain, wealthy or poor, age. Many older nothing more than a burden, it seems, to all around them. I have no doubt that there are plenty of stories of older people in Tasmania and across Australia who lead a comfortable and happy existence in their twilight years. Such people tend to have support networks that are caring, kind, loving, and a constant part of their life. They live knowing they are loved, wanted, and appreciated. They know they will be missed when they pass. Sadly, however, there are many who are not so fortunate. Over many years, there have been numerous inquiries, reports, royal commissions, all dealing with stories of inadequate staffing levels, neglect and abuse within the aged care sector. There have been stories that demonstrate that in some instances, profit and cost cutting have been more important than the emotional and physical well-being of those in care. We have heard too many stories of older people being packed up and placed into aged care facilities only to discover that the facility is not a home as one may imagine a home to be. Rather, they find themselves in a facility with a regime of strict rules where individual self-agency is removed or greatly diminished. Beyond the facade of manicured gardens and common areas boasting expensive furnishings, many find themselves in a place where genuine care and attention is as difficult to find as a nurse or carer when one is required. There is no sugarcoating the fact that across the country, some older and valuable members of our community have been inexcusable happenings. Then, in 2020, COVID-19 came along and things certainly didn't improve. The government quickly implemented restrictive practices with the view of reducing the curve and the risk of COVID-19 community transmission. Residential care facilities, without national uniformity, imposed restrictions in relation to how the facility would operate during the pandemic. The reason for stringent measures was, we were told, to protect residents from catching the virus, to keep them safe, out of harm's way. Yet hundreds of people died in nursing homes. They did not die from catching the virus while out and about in the community or from spending time with family and friends. In the main, they caught the virus from those tasked to look after them. Hard lockdowns introduced an array of potential risks for people residing in aged care facilities. Family, friends, visitors, volunteers. In many ways, the cohort of visitors had been a valuable means of independent oversight. Visitors often play a vital role in providing essential services to a resident by assisting with meals, laundry, personal and physical care. They also provide company and friendship. The Royal Commission is clear evidence that acts of abuse, neglect and intimidation occur even when the doors are wide open. With the doors shut tight and the curtains drawn, the risks to residents during hard lockdowns is surely likely to increase. I am certain that there are exemplars in the aged care sector. However, the Royal Commission into the aged care quality and safety is a product of the fact that, left unchecked, certain individuals will engage in management decisions or care practices that are wanting. COVID-19 did not make the unscrupulous scrupulous, or make poorly trained or ill-equipped staff kinder, more caring, or more competent. It is important, though, to note that there are some very fine, valuable, passionate, and honourable people working in the aged care sector. Their commitment, kindness, and compassion toward residents must be acknowledged and applauded. Unfortunately, of intentions to look after residents to a high standard may find themselves hamstrung and compromised by instructions issued by management. Instructions may include strict rules about how many minutes are allocated for a carer to shower, dress, take care of oral hygiene, and in some instances assist residents with eating. There appears to be little time, if any, factored in that enables carers and other staff to sit, talk, and have a laugh with residents. A simple thing which many residents crave. It must be stressed that some of the very dedicated and caring staff who have witnessed actions that amount or may amount to neglect or abuse are often scared to blow the whistle in fear of losing their job. It is also common for residents, friends, family, volunteers, and allied health workers to be reluctant to make formal complaints in fear of negative consequences. It is arguable that when the doors are shut and the curtains are drawn, the fear of residents would be heightened. While it is acknowledged that restrictive rules and laws have an important place, we must not allow restrictive practices to continue when the public health officials have said that it is safe to lift them. It would also seem that a human rights lens was not put over many of the restrictions that were implemented in the aged care sector. There are many anecdotal stories of direct and indirect discrimination and prohibited conduct inflicted upon older persons during the pandemic. Underreporting of complaints is of significant concern. If all of us are on the same inescapable journey of ageing, it begs the question why we allow some older members of our community to be subjected to disdain, neglect, and abuse. We have a collective responsibility to ensure that the elders of our community are treated with respect, kindness, and dignity. Had this been the ethos of our collective, personal, professional, and political selves, the dreadfulness that some older people have experienced in the course of the pandemic may have been avoided. COVID-19 allowed loneliness and isolation to creep unchecked into the lives of some of the most resilient people. It has been the cause of people dying alone and being buried without ceremony and honour from family and friends. We need to be alert to the fact that some facilities may use even the merest hint of a virus as an excuse to maintain unnecessary restrictions, thus avoiding external scrutiny and oversight 7 days a week by family, friends, and external service providers. There are valuable lessons to be learned from COVID-19 experience. Importantly, decision makers, influencers, managers, owners, shareholders, and staff within the aged care sector need to remind themselves that they are not immune from ageing. Each and every one of us face the possibility of going into or being placed into residential care. Each and every one of us faces the possibility of being dependent upon others to ensure our basic needs are met. I have no doubt that if and when such a situation becomes the reality, everybody would be wanted to be treated well. I'm sure that all of us would want to be seen as a person who has lived a life, has feelings, memories, and stories to tell. We must encourage the better side of human nature to be seen as the ordinary, not the extraordinary in care practices that exist throughout the aged care sector. All staff, from the top down, need to be provided with regular training and education in relation to rights protection and gerontology. Carers must be paid properly. We should celebrate and showcase organisations, big or small, that wholeheartedly embrace best practice. We need to thank and acknowledge staff who treat those in their care with compassion, interest, and professional diligence. We need strong, robust, efficient, and effective adult safeguarding legislation. Resident staff, family members should be made of their rights and protections under state process and easy to navigate. Organisations must take swift action the minute they know or suspect that neglect or abuse or discriminatory practices may be occurring. Accountability and consequence must follow. Individually and collectively, we need to decide what sort of culture we want in the aged care sector now and on the other side of the pandemic. Thank you for listening.
Our next speaker is CODA Australia Chief Executive Ian Yates, who's going to speak to us today about systemic responses to societal ageism, which enables abuse.
Good morning. Elder abuse and damaging phenomenon that should have no place in modern Australia. However, it exists, and over the last decades we've become much more aware of it, and it's clearly more prevalent than our society has recognised and likes to admit. We need to recognise it for what it is. Physical abuse is violence, it's assault, it's criminal. Emotional abuse is harassment, intimidation, coercion, and also often criminal. Financial abuse is theft, it's criminal. Crime has many causes, some personal, but some significantly affected by societal factors. Crime thrives more in certain contexts and less in others. Elder abuse is most often, well, not always, but most often an outcome of a power imbalance, of a degradation of the value of the older person, devaluing them and regarding them as less than a first-class person. Elder abuse is not simply a hard and fast line you cross. It's part of a continuum. And that continuum starts with the systemic devaluing of older people in our society, what we now regularly call ageism, reduced roles, reduced engagement, the feeling of invisibility that many older people will cite, infantilization of older people, and generally a secondary set of expectations about older people's roles. So as well as needing new laws about tackling elder abuse, violence, theft, coercion directly, we need to look at broader societal issues that allow that kind of creation of an ageist attitude to flourish and what we can do to reduce that. Because that kind of ageism leads people to have less roles, to have less engagement, to be more invisible. So we need to tackle those issues in a more systemic, broader societal way. And that includes a wide range of measures. And I'm going to just today give you some examples. It means continuing to create greater workforce participation, opportunities for greater workforce participation for those who want to and can, to be more engaged with community, because often older people find themselves increasingly being edged out and an expectation that they won't continue to be engaged. That doesn't always have to be full-time, and it's one of the things that we want to see blurred is the called retirement that now needs to be much more fluid. We want to tackle ageism in the health system so that we don't, as we do now, find that certain developments in a person's health are regarded as an inevitable part of aging. As the doctors frequently still say, well, at your age, you need to expect. Now we know that in many, many cases that is not the case. CODA's own strengthening programs, Strength for Life, Living Longer, Living Stronger programs a very clear demonstration of one of those. And yet when we first introduced those many years ago, people thought we were a bit crazy. But we need a whole range of preventative and positive health programs enabling people to continue to be fit, healthy, active into very old age, and the examples are there for us. We also need to change the regulatory and funding environment in aged care or aged support and care, so that that system is under the control of the people who need supports and cares. This is a battle that CODA's been engaged in for quite some time now. Because at the moment we have a system, whether we're talking residential or home care, that is still predominantly the province under the control of providers and government. And it ought to be something that is under the control of the people who need it, who can then set the terms of engagement. No, they're not experts in everything, but what they are experts in is their own life. We also need to ensure that older people have equal access to protection and to the justice system, to legal support. And for many reasons, that is not always the case, and that prevents people taking action. And we also need to ensure that there is adequacy in our retirement income system so that people have the means that they need to feel confident about living a good life. And we need to make it fit for purpose for a modern Australia. We need to ensure that all Australians have appropriate, secure and affordable housing, because housing is one of those things that really affects people's vulnerability in later life, poor housing. And finally, as an example, we need to strengthen our social infrastructure and support services, which are very stretched now, to create what we've been calling and others have been calling age-friendly communities that can help address social isolation, promote participation, address loneliness and the vulnerabilities that that creates. So as well as direct action against elder abuse, there are so many other ways that we can strengthen the social and economic fabric of our society. Reduce the system. Those measures won't solve everything, but they will change the context in which we are trying to then tackle abuse that will be seen as very outside the pale and not the end part of a continuum of devaluing older people. So that is what we need to pick up as coders systemically, as well as all the other measures that are tackle it direct.
Our next speaker is Professor John Beard. He is ideally placed to talk about elder abuse in the context of the decade of healthy ageing and the Sustainable Development Goals.
I join you, if it is only by distance, for this important meeting on ageism and the post-COVID world. I work for the University of New South Wales, but I also have a lot of roles in other parts of the world, for example, the United States, Europe and China. And that has meant that during the pandemic, I have actually been stuck overseas. So I'm currently in an attic in an apartment in Geneva. And I hear about what's happening in Australia and other parts of the world through different media sources. My main, I subscribe to the New York Times, to the Tribune de Genève, but I also regularly look at the ABC and I subscribe to the Adelaide Advertiser, since I'm an Adelaide Crows supporter. And it's really interesting looking at all those different sources and experiencing what we are currently experiencing here, and seeing just how different circumstances are in Australia at the moment. And so I thought I might just spend a little bit of time really trying to explain to you how this pandemic is evolving in other parts of the world, so you can understand the the challenges it presents, but also the opportunities, and how it will, I think, reframe the way we think as we move forward. So, as I said, I'm here in Switzerland. Switzerland is a population a little bit bigger than Victoria. Until recently, we were experiencing almost 10,000 cases of COVID a day, with 100 deaths a day, a large proportion of people. So if you could think about 10,000 cases every day for months and put that into Victoria, you may get a bit of a sense about the challenge that's being presented here. And that has led to a very strong societal response. And so for a month now, or far longer, all our restaurants have been closed, but for a month, all other shops have been closed. Everything is basically shut, and people are stuck in their apartments with very little to be able to do. One thing that's interesting is the schools are still open, which has helped me because I have a 6-year-old child, but it's actually a very, very different scenario than has been faced even in the severe lockdowns which you have faced within Australia, which have been very time limited. This is ongoing. I have a place across the border 45 minutes away in France. I can't get there without having a nose swab to prove that I don't have the virus. And, you know, there are also positive signs that the vaccination is rolling out here. About 5% of the population have now been vaccinated. I've had my first vaccine. And so there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but really made stark the failings that are currently in the system and which are often driving these sorts of responses we're having to put in place. In the United Kingdom, when the pandemic first started, there was an initial idea that what needed to happen was not put the whole country into lockdown, but to protect the vulnerable. And that's, you know, a reasonable idea, except it very quickly became obvious that that was absolutely impossible because there had been consistent disinvestment in the systems that might have made it possible. There had been a very strong ongoing disinvestment in long-term care, in home care, and all those other social supports, which might have allowed older people to be looked after in places of safety. There was totally inadequate systems of pandemic response. There was lack of the infrastructure for masks and protective personal equipment and so on. So I think that that level, it became very obvious that the systems that were currently in place were inadequate. There are also many other failings. So I think overall what we found was that long-term care systems in general really often provided very poor quality care, and were not prepared for the sorts of care which might be necessary. I think even in Australia, which has a reasonable system of long-term care, what we find is that many of the providers actually put profits ahead of the quality of the care they provide. And that there's a real equity issue there, because those people who are socioeconomically secure often can afford the sort of quality care which we know is available in Australia. But what is left to those who are less socioeconomically advantaged is sometimes care of really questionable quality and quite vulnerable to all sorts of forms of elder abuse. I think the second thing that became very clear is the lack of integration between health systems and long-term care systems. What we saw in some countries was older people presenting to hospital with the symptoms of COVID and then being sent back to institutional care, where of course they passed on the virus, which ran rapid throughout the institution and resulted in many. And in some countries, for example, in Belgium, there was what I found a quite offensive response, which managed to keep the demand for healthcare low by passing it on to the long-term care system, and basically showing a devaluing of the lives of the residents of long-term care institutions. I think there's also it's become obvious that there's major barriers between home care and institutional care, and often the idea that it's a one-way trip, that you move from home care institutional care and you into institutional care and you don't move back. And I think in all of these settings there has been, because of the pressure of keeping people together and the limitations on what they can do, there has been a dramatic increase in violence of varying sorts and other forms of elder abuse. So the situation has been very bad. I think what has also arisen in my mind is a real questioning of how does society see the role of older people? How are they valued? And I think in some places what we've seen very much is a development of a them and us mentality, where we talk about older people as if they're something different. And in some parts of the world, people feel that restrictions are being imposed on them because of older people, where in fact we're all in this together, and all of us will become older at one point in life, and there is no distinction. We're just at different stages of the life course. So things have been quite dramatic internationally, but there is a saying which I think is really useful, which is never waste a good crisis. And I think because these things have become so stark, there is a lot of pressure now on governments to rethink the sorts of systems they have in place and to try and do things better. And there is one terrific initiative I'd like to very briefly finish with, which I hope provides a global political mandate for action in that area, and that is the Decade of Healthy Aging, which has now been endorsed by the United Nations and will run from 2021 to 2030. And on WHO's work with the World Report on Aging and Health and the Global Strategy and Action Plan on Aging and Health. But it is now a UN initiative, and countries around the world will be expected to respond in some ways or other, and Australia is no different. There are four main themes of action being recommended. The first is to reframe the way we think about aging and older people, basically to tackle ageism. So I think the discourse which we're having today is really important, and hopefully will stimulate thinking on that in Australia. The second is to try and build communities that can support people to age in as positive a way as possible. And again, the model of the WHO Healthy Aging model is a capabilities model, which looks to ensure that people of all ages are enabled to be and to do the things that they value. So how do we build communities which do that for people at all ages? The third is to try and rethink the way we deliver healthcare, to try and make it more integrated, responsive, to try and really shift the focus towards primary care and managing people as close as possible to their homes. And the final is to ensure that people who need it have access to long-term care. And while I perhaps am a bit critical of what's available in Australia, and I'm sure the Royal Commission, which releases its report tomorrow my time, will have something to say on this. In some parts of the world, there's no long-term care at all. And if a woman, for example, develops dementia, she's likely to be chained to a tree for the rest of her life. So we need to really tackle this issue globally. But I hope what I've done, as well as perhaps making you understand just how stark the challenges are, is also to understand that this is the opportunity to move forward in a fresh way. And I hope the discussions that you have over the course of this meeting will perhaps form a foundation for moving forward and to building back better, really rethinking of the role of older people within our society, and thinking about how we can enable them not just to live lives of dignity, but lives of meaning as well. So good luck with the rest of your discussions, and I look forward to hearing where they lead you.
Thanks so much, John. Our next speaker is the Honourable Dr K Patterson AO, Australia's Age Discrimination Commissioner. And I'm very pleased to say and to announce that if you come to next year's conference, you'll be seeing much more of Kay, because she's generously agreed to be our conference ambassador. Thanks, Kay.
I'd like to acknowledge the Cook Nation peoples as the traditional owners of the land to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd especially like to thank Elder Abuse Action Australia and CODA Tasmania for organising this online forum as a prelude to what I know is going to be a fantastic conference, the 7th National Elder Abuse Conference in 2022. Put that date in your diary, February the 14th to the 15th. This forum provides a timely opportunity for us to reflect on the huge year that was 2020 and the global pandemic, which has shone a light on older people, not only as vulnerable members, but as active participants and contributors to our community. 2020 also ushered in the UN's Decade of Action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals and the World Health Organization's Decade of Action on Healthy Aging. These provide us with further impetus to take action and to strive for a future where the rights and dignity of older people are respected. As Age Discrimination Commissioner, I've chosen 3 key priority areas on which to focus: elder abuse in the community, older women's risk of homelessness, and age discrimination and the workplace. Now I've been asked to speak today about age discrimination, its relationship to elder abuse, and strategies for countering ageism by governments and our community. I want to start by talking about ageism and reference the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 10, which calls for, and I quote, reduced inequalities, noting that to reduce inequalities, policy should be universal in principle, paying attention to the needs of disadvantaged and marginalised populations. Ageism undermines the human rights of older Australians and is an obstacle to achieving a fair and equal society and recognises the inherent rights of all people. I recently came across a report by entitled Doddery But Dear, Examining Age-Related Stereotypes. I mention this because it contains one of the best definitions of ageism I've come across, and I quote, ageism is a combination of how we think about age, stereotypes, how we feel about age, prejudice, and how we behave in relation to age, discrimination. Part of my role is to advocate for the need to recognise and call out ageism when we see it. This can include generalised negative views of older people as less deserving, burdensome, frail, needing protection. When ageist attitudes are reflected in behaviour, this becomes age discrimination, and it may be demonstrated in a number of ways. The types of services available to older people, language used when interacting with or talking about them. Sometimes we see this, calling somebody dearie, talking down to someone, age-based assumptions about their preferences and capabilities, leading to exclusions, for example, in decision-making, or monitoring processes related to the quality and standard of services and care they receive. We can not only have ageist attitudes expressed towards us, we can also take these onto ourselves. This is known as internalized ageism and can have detrimental effects on older people's health and well-being. It can also result in older people feeling they can't exercise their rights. Elder abuse is an extreme expression of ageism, resulting in harm. This may be financial, physical, psychological, sexual, or neglect. And ageism can be malevolent or benevolent. An example of the latter is where attitudes tip the scale towards protection rather than respecting an older person's autonomy. Benevolent ageism is an extension of ageist views about the independence and agency of older people. When taken to the extreme, these attitudes can result in elder abuse. For example, limiting an older person's social interactions or activities in ways that go beyond public health advice during COVID-19. During the pandemic, I've heard examples of adult children moving their parents in with them to protect them, with disastrous consequences. In one case, the older parent was moved into their child's backyard shed. In another, the older parent was put into a room of a house, forced to eat, sleep there. Ageism can also be a barrier to noticing or reporting elder abuse. Negative attitudes or assumptions about older people, they can contribute to an environment where older people's concerns are dismissed or not taken seriously, or where older people feel like they're unable to speak up. Whether benevolent or malevolent, during pandemic or normal times, it is critical that we are on the alert to ageism and its pervasive effects and harmful effects. When it comes to countering ageism, we know that programs and relationships which foster positive intergenerational experiences and connections are the best way to reduce ageist attitudes. Cornell University undertook a study which was published in the American Journal of Public Health. That study found that intergenerational projects combined with education were successful at countering and reducing ageism. There are many intergenerational projects fostering communication and relationship building across generations to reduce ageist stereotypes. A couple of examples include that wonderful ABC program, Older People's Home for 4-year-olds, and it brought preschoolers and people living in residential aged care in Sydney's northern suburbs together on a regular basis for activities that built intergenerational connections. This had positive effects on both the physical and mental well-being of the older participants and the children who developed relationships with them. Also, it affected their families, many still keeping in contact with each other. I also support a wonderful intergenerational art project, the Centenarian Portrait Project by teenagers. This initiative brings together 100 centenarians with 100 high school students who paint their portrait. That's in every state. It's been held up a bit by COVID, but we've done 3 major eastern states and we're hoping to finish that in the next year or 2. I encourage you to check out the Marantha Gunya Intergenerational Learning Centre in Wellington, New Zealand, and the Griffith University Intergenerational Care Project for more positive examples and inspiration. We can all think about practical ways we can foster intergenerational relationships in our own lives. Some ideas include keeping in those that we know who are at risk of social isolation, just phoning them or using social media apps or visiting them, following any distancing regulations that apply in your state or territory, checking as these continue to change. This will have the important effect of reducing social isolation and loneliness, which in turn are factors that heighten the risk of elder abuse. On the elder abuse front, I've been working assiduously to ensure that the recommendations from the 2017 Australian Law Reform Commission's report, Elder Abuse, a National Legal Response, just don't sit on a shelf like so many other reports, but are acted on and implemented. To this end, I've been advocating for all the Australian Attorney Generals to agree to 1, a National Register of Enduring Powers of Attorney and Guardianship documents, and they're working on that, and 2, harmonisation of legislation around powers of attorney across jurisdictions, and they're a bit slow on that. While we've seen some movement towards the development of a national register, as I've said, the same can't be said of harmonisation. I urge all of you watching today to consider raising this issue with your local member or writing to the Attorney General in your state or territory. The more of us who emphasise the importance of having a harmonised power of attorney enduring documents across all jurisdictions, the better we'll be able to help older people, educate them about their rights and to educate those who have their power of attorney about their responsibilities. Current inconsistencies across jurisdictions cause confusion in the community, make it difficult for families to understand the rules and for experts to provide advice across jurisdictions. They also impede cooperation between state and territory public advocates in investigating instances of abuse of an attorney's power. Harmonisation will make it easier for families to look after older family members in other jurisdictions, as well as to educate older people, as I've said, about their rights and about the attorneys about their responsibilities. It's also important that we're able to communicate this information to people whose first language is not English. That would be much easier if we had harmonisation across the whole country. Over the past 5 to 6 years, elder abuse has gained increased interest from the government and from the community. On a national level, the Federal Attorney General has, in addition to the Australian Law Reform Commission report, released a national plan to respond to Australians. A new Assistant Minister has been appointed to assist the Attorney General, and one of her responsibilities is for inquiries referred to the ALRC, including the 2017 report on elder abuse and its recommendations. We also now have a national free call line, as you can see up here, 1800 Elder Help, 1800 353 374. That line directs to helplines in the state from which the person is calling. As well as that, we have Compass, an online elder abuse knowledge hub and service directory. And on a very regular basis, new information is being put up onto that website to help people working across the area, working in elder abuse, working with older people, to look to resources and material that will help them. As little is known currently about the prevalence of elder abuse in Australia, the Attorney General's Department has also funded the Australian Institute of Family Studies to undertake a national prevalence study. This project, and I've just been talking to the people doing it, is almost complete and will help all of those involved in advocacy, prevention, education, and support to better understand elder abuse in Australia and tailor our activities. There is still a long way to go, but we can all play a part in combating elder abuse by knowing the risk factors and the red flags, and knowing the National Elder Abuse Helpline number, 1800 353 374. I want to conclude by drawing your attention to the World Health Organization's Decade of Action on Healthy Aging Priority 8. Ageism, changing the way we think, feel and act towards age and aging is possible. We can make it happen. As I say over and over again, the culture we set will be the culture we inherit. We can all take action to counter ageism in our everyday lives and to combat elder abuse. No effort is too small or insignificant. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate. We'd like to run a poll now as part of the forum, and we'd like to know if you support a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People. It won't take long for you to respond, and the poll will appear on your screen shortly. I'd now like to introduce you to Dr. Kieran Raberu, Chair of the Steering Committee of the Global Alliance of the Rights of Older People. Thanks, Kieran.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this forum and this very important conversation on unveiling ageism, elder abuse, and the right in the age of COVID-19. My name is Kieran Raberu. I'm a physician, a geriatric psychiatrist practicing in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I'm currently the chair of the steering group of the Global Alliance on the Rights of Older People. I'm going to spend the first few minutes telling you about GARUP, which stands for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People. It was established in 2011, and it was born out of the need to strengthen the rights and the voice of older people everywhere. Our vision is a world in which older people live free from discrimination of all kinds and are able to fully enjoy their rights. We have 380 members and growing, with 80 different countries represented at GARUP. Our website is rightsofolderpeople.org. I would request that you take note of that website because we'll be coming back to that later. A lot of what we'll be talking about today originates from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document, a monumental feat of work, was created in 1948, and it covering every single possible human right that you can think of, except for one, which is, as you guessed, it's age. And again, we will return to that. I encourage you all to visit our website, which is rightsofolderpeople.org. Join GARUP. I would encourage you to use the messaging that we have on our website to help with this, with our mission. Please read the discussion papers, use the social media and other resources. Please contact your politician that looks after you and solicit their support at the open-ended working group, which is to take place on March 29th to April the 1st in New York. So at this point, I'm going to take you on a small journey of self-reflection on the experience of aging. I would like to share with you how this lethal pandemic of ageism and the crisis against older persons created by the COVID-19 pandemic provides us with a window of opportunity to move forward to galvanize the world's people and governments to support the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Older People. My message today is for anyone who has lived through this unimaginable year. Please join me on a journey of reflection to pause and consider the experience of aging, both for yourself and for people who you love over the years to come. I do not need to remind you of the elder abuse and neglect that have been taking place as an enormous public health challenge for many decades. An estimated 1 in 10 individuals over the age of 60 suffer physical, verbal, or sexual abuse or financial exploitation. The COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed a vicious force, unveiling the rampant pandemic of ageism, even more vulnerable to abuse, leaving them behind, totally excluded, and invisible to society. We have witnessed the rights of older people being clearly disregarded or completely violated. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the deep flaws in our society, disproportionately affecting older people. They have been doubly impacted by 2 simultaneous pandemics of ageism combined with COVID-19. The phenomenon of ageism, which has also been present for decades in our society, has been transformed from being an implicit bias to an explicit, blatant contempt for human rights of older people, powered by a perfect storm of the dual pandemic, with each pandemic fueling the flames of the other, continues to rage ferociously and to ravage this segment of our population like a wildfire. Some examples of the human rights violations include discriminatory employment, marginalization by media, grossly deficient home care supports, just violations of the sickening and gruesome state of numerous long-term care homes across the world. The impact of systemic ageism is not scientifically tracked or monitored, but dealt with by denial, minimization, and justification based solely on the person's chronological age by large portions of society, institutions, policymakers, and governments, both nationally and internationally. Decades of being excluded and made invisible by ageism have resulted in egregious and intense exacerbations of the violations of human rights of older people during this past year. These global fires that continue to burn as we speak against humanity, and specifically against older people, are deplorable and are being permitted to rage on, taking the lives of thousands of older persons and causing unimaginable suffering with no holds barred, no one to monitor, measure, or track its impact. I propose to you that this treatment of older people is not humane by any measure and must not be permitted. My message to you today is simple. This must change now. 10 years since the United Nations Secretary General's statement to expedite action on the adoption of a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. After what we have just lived through this past year, I believe that we must act now. Across the globe, the main victims of the dual pandemics, no matter which way you measure, have been older people. Nursing homes have been turned into quote, killing grounds, unquote, as stated by Craig Mokhiber recently. Some countries are adopting vaccine policies to be administered only to those under 60 years of age. Some politicians and public officials are openly talking about sacrificing older people to benefit younger ones. Older persons' actual lives and their rights have been the victims of the pandemic. This is what human rights advocates have been for years. You might stop and ask, how did this happen? How did we get there? How do we understand this? We must go back in time. It starts with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was a milestone document in the history of human rights. As I said, with 30 different articles, but not a word about discrimination on the basis of age. It covers everything from social, cultural, educational, race, color, sex, language, religion, political opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status, political, jurisdictional or international status, and on it goes, but no mention of age. Please note, this is the basis of every other adopted treaty in international human rights spheres and they're all based on this, with very little attention being given to the human rights of older persons, with no international human rights-based mechanism to track, monitor their outcomes and for accountability. I think that this is the moment that we need to use to fill this gap. So what are the drivers that account for these observations? Why is this happening now? Well, part of the reason is the demographic shift. Back in 1900, when the mean age of people lived was about 48 years, no one actually worried about getting old. And this has gone up to 84 today. Total population was 1 billion in 1800, only 1.6 billion in 1900, but it has grown to 7 billion in 2020. It's projected to go up to 9.7 billion in 2050. But 20% of those 9.7 billion will be people over 60. In 2030, we expect that older people will outnumber children under the age of 10. And the fastest growing segment of our population is the 80 plus. Our life cycle is changing. People are living longer, participating longer in society, working longer, retiring later, having children later. And this is a very large group of people that cannot now be ignored. However, ageism is well and alive. We know from various human rights monitoring mechanisms that violations are simply based on age, against contributing to a broad range of expressions in our society, both at the national level and the international level. As people get older, they've been subjected to violations from political, civil, economic, social, cultural, and other ways just because of their age. They're subjected to exclusion, deprivation, neglect and abuse, the denial of work, mandatory retirement, social security, access to productive resources, physical and mental health care, palliative care, essential services and supports, with no voice, no power, no visibility, and no mechanism to advocate for themselves. Their autonomy and independence are infringed upon in the areas of political and social participation, finance, property, housing, justice, regulatory policy, and decision making. What about others were in similar situations? We have a broad range of treaties now to protect and give legal framework to a variety of groups, including women, children, and the disabled, but nothing for older people, despite a growing body of evidence of their invisibility, exclusion, discrimination, and atrocities against them. There is evidence that even in places where other forms of discrimination are declining, that ageism continues to thrive. In the absence of an international treaty and standards, and often non-existent national standards, we have witnessed shocking institutional neglect and abuse, exploitation both financially and otherwise, blatant discrimination in public policy, and absence of political will to change. The gaps for older people are not addressed by current international legal instruments. In many areas, such as capacity, legal planning, guardianship, long-term care, institutional care, physical health, as well as pandemic, heartbreaking stories of people, older people have emerged where they've been denied basic care such as food, water, toileting, medications, exposure to COVID-19 without adequate vaccination or PPE. They're sequestered in filth and unhygienic conditions and socially isolated without any psychological or social support. I want to emphasize that this is not due to lack of resources, but absence of standards and absence of enforcement. While we have international frameworks to protect lots of other groups, which they absolutely require, there's nothing to protect the rights of and violations against older people. A legally binding set of standards at the international and national level is urgently needed now to remedy these massive gaps in our system, not just with fragmentary and disconnected approaches as it currently exists, but with a new ironclad international human rights treaty on the rights of older people everywhere. This will provide us with a comprehensive framework for setting standards, a single platform for advocacy, a vehicle for international dialogue, an instrument to ensure accountability, tracking, monitoring of the rights of older people for the first time ever, which we all, including our family and loved ones, will enjoy during our life. This will help us move away from the ageism-based decision-making to a human rights-based paradigm, dignity and humane approach to aging, where we can all celebrate the diversity and the lives of each person to its fullest. There is no room for indifference. There's no room for apathy. There's no room for projecting blame to others for the tragic fate of older people in our homes, in our towns and cities, in our countries, and in our world. Millions of older lives depend on this, and we must move now to remedy this intense and deadly pandemic of ageism, catalyzed dramatically by the COVID-19 pandemic. The only sustainable and definitive solution is the adoption of a new United Nations Convention on the rights of older people. This is a call for action for each of you. I would really love you to visit GARAP's website, join GARAP, engage in our work, use GARAP's messaging, read our discussion papers, use social media and other resources, but most importantly, people about to talk to their politicians, and I'd really like you, each of you, to talk and strongly solicit their support. I thank you very much. I'm hoping that this will generate some lively discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kieran. Well, the results of the poll are in. 100% of our audience support a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People. Possibly no surprise, but nonetheless a very good endorsement on Kieran's presentation. And I'm going to read out something that's on the Q&A this morning, which is from Bill Mitchell. Thank you, Kieran, for setting the scene for why a new convention is so critical to correct the protection gaps of older persons now while COVID-19 continues, but also as we transition out of this pandemic. Australia assures me that they will be present and engage in the OEWG meeting, but maintain their position that they do not support a new convention. Our colleagues here can ask their responsible ministers at both the Department of Foreign Affairs and Attorney Generals why such a position is taken when a convention is clearly supported and needed. Thanks, Bill, for that comment. Now to some questions that have come to us, one or two by the Q&A function, but also from people who were keen to attend today's forum but were unable to make the live session. So firstly, a question to Ian. How do you reflect on the intersection between our support and care system and our health systems, and how can this be changed to improve the rights of older people?
Question, it's a good one, and we'll be looking carefully at what the Aged Care Royal Commission's report being released today says about the interface with health. What we've been saying for a very long time is that interface is poor, and that in fact once you enter the aged care system, particularly once you enter residential care, it's as if you don't any longer have rights of access to health. Now you do, and that needs to be made very clear, and it needs to be made very clear in the new Aged Care Act, so that people are not beholden to providers and the whims of them and government, but actually have enforceable rights. And that'll be a key focus, one of the key focuses over the next couple of years, getting that act right.
Great. Thanks, Sam. And Kay, how can we try to combat benevolent ageism that we've seen so much of during COVID-19? I've heard of older people still discouraged from leaving home. I expect you may have heard similar. And with very little active cases in the community now, if any.
I'm not on there. I'm sorry. You might need to go to someone else for a moment.
No, okay, I can hear you. I just can't.
Well, I don't know whether other people can see me. Could you just repeat the question? I couldn't quite.
Sure. How can we try to combat benevolent ageism that we've seen so much of during COVID-19? I've heard of older people still discouraged from leaving home, with very little active cases in the community now, if any.
Well, I think there are a number of ways in which we can encourage it. I think when I was speaking, I talked about people internalising ageism, and I really find it difficult when people say, I'm invisible. I think what we have to do is be out and proud of the fact that we're older. I'm 76. I think we ought to be saying, we have contributed to our community over our lifetime. We're an important part of the community. We've got things we can impart to grandchildren, to nieces and nephews, to our community. When you look at volunteering, it's a huge number of people in the volunteering sector, Meals on Wheels and visitors programs are older. I think what we need to do is proud of what older people do. We've got to stand up for ourselves first, but then the community has to understand that they will be older one day. And as I said, the culture we set is the culture they'll inherit. And I say that to young students, to younger people, that we all need to make an effort to actually appreciate all ages. People can be as ageist about young people as they are about older people. So I think the most important thing is we need to work to fight this. And as I said, the evidence seems to show that intergenerational programs that are positive and education are two of the ways of reducing ageism and reducing people being forced into a mould. This is the way you're supposed to behave as an older person. This is what people are supposed to think of you when you're an older person. We've got to break that mould. And I think all of us, and I hope at the conference in February, break the mould. We don't want a mould that makes us all fit into one sort of category.
Thanks, Kay. Maybe we should have changed. We should change the name of the conference, Breaking the Mould.
Well, that could be for the 8th one.
And Kieran, how do you think we can pull back from so many years of systemic exclusion and underinvestment for older people?
Thanks for that question and comments earlier as well. I think the answer is really quite straightforward and simple. That I want to just say again is that if we don't do something about that now, it's going to affect every single human being, including ourselves and people we love and care for, as we move for, over the next few years. We wouldn't treat anyone, our children, even our pets, in the way that we have treated our older persons in the last year. And I think if you're human beings and you can't see that, then I'm not really sure how to respond to that. Because I think that it is time, and this is the time, if you go back 20, 30, 40, 50 years, women and children and disabled people were in the same situation. Now we have conventions to protect their human rights. And there is a universal framework, a legal framework to hold people accountable if they don't do the right thing. We need the same protection for older people now, because the current system does not lend itself to protection.
Thank you, Kieran. And a question that several of our panelists may choose to answer, but I'm going to start with Sarah first, if I may. And this is a question from Bryony Dow, Professor Bryony Dow. COVID-19 has brought into sharp relief the issue of the rights of older people living in residential aged care, especially in relation to visitation rights. How do we support individual residents' rights to choose the circumstances in which they live when they live in a communal or institutional environment, which is also their only home?
I think it really goes back to what I was saying earlier about the restrictions that were put in place in aged care residential facilities, and whether they were in fact a little harsher than what could otherwise have been put in place. So it really does need a human rights lens to be put over those policies and procedures in relation to facilities, and also to continue to question those restrictions, for people to possibly make complaints rather than just accept it. And it's very difficult when you're sort of being faced with those instructions and you've got a feeling that it's just not right. Why should that person be treated more differently than I am? And so we do have anti-discrimination legislation. We do have legislation that protects people from prohibited conduct. So it really is about people stepping forward and questioning whether those restrictions in aged care facilities are in fact fair and reasonable in all of the circumstances, and not just fair and reasonable to suit the operation of a particular facility.
Indeed. Thank you, Sarah. Ian, do you have a perspective on this question? How do we support individual residents' rights to choose the circumstances in which they live when they live in a communal or institutional environment, which is also their only home?
Yes. So obviously this has been a very significant concern for us throughout the COVID experience, and particularly once we came out of the worst of the transmission in the community. And it remains, I regret to say that it remains a problem with the minority of homes right now, both in terms of access, but also in terms of residents being allowed to go into the community when in contexts in which the rest of the community is now virtually, in most places, unrestricted. And I think there are a number of different approaches. So certainly we have encouraged people and enabled people to make formal complaints. We, of course, played the lead role in initiating and continue to anchor the visitor code process, which has created a framework which at least the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission now asks providers about. Are you following the code? And if not, why not? And that's been really important. It's given them a set of rules to follow, and aged care providers like rules. they like following them and imposing them. But what has been missing are two things in my view. One, going back to my earlier response, we need an act that very clearly spells out rights and that gives a framework whereby the rights of older people to decide themselves about their risks and to have access to the community and not be isolated by someone else's decision, provided there's not a risk to other people in doing that. That right needs to be entrenched. But secondly, we actually need the Quality and Safety Commission then to be enforcing standards based around the fact that the way many older people have been treated in residential care this year and last year, is still being treated now, does not accord with the standard number one of treating people with dignity and respect. It does not treat, you're not treating an older person with dignity and respect if you're treating them like an infant. And whereas the Quality and Safety Commission's kind of statutory brief at the moment is there actual serious harm being done to that person? Now, we can argue about the harm. Serious and long-term harm has been done to people by the visitor restrictions, but we need the Commission to be more bold in its interpretation as well. And those are all things that are going to be pursued quite vigorously in the context of the response to the Royal Commission.
Thanks so much, Ian. And Kieran, do you have a view about this? How do we support individual residents' rights to choose the circumstances in which they live when they live in a communal or institutional environment, which is also their only home?
Thank you for that question. I think really it boils down to people having the right to choose, and we're at the point in our lives now where this is not about resources. It's not about people not having enough money. In places like Canada and Australia, we shouldn't have to put up with so much suffering and so much death from care homes. So people who choose to live at home should be provided the services and the supports at home. In fact, most people would love to stay at home and not go into long-term care. The reason that they have to move to a facility is because they don't have enough home supports. And even though it may not be cheaper, I think at the end of the day, the autonomy and independence that people will have in making that choice will be far better for their own physical and mental and spiritual health than being in a long-term care facility. The last thing I want to say is that everyone on the call today responded that they would all support a convention on the rights of older people. And I would like the politicians in Australia and the listeners to know that. And I would like each person to speak to their own ministers who are going to be at the open-ended working group to make sure that they support the convention on the rights of older people, because without that instrument, there is going to be no accountability at the national level or international level for the human rights of older people. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kieran. And Kay, you may have the last question and answer in this session today. Given what we've discussed this morning, what's the one key action you think we can get from the 7th National Elder Abuse Conference?
Can you hear me now? I can't see whether I'm on or not.
I can hear you.
But I did actually get dressed for the occasion, but it doesn't seem to have worked. Look, I think it's difficult to say should there be one key outcome. I think we've got outcomes that need to come in the legal sense. In some, I feel very strongly about the harmonisation of power of attorney. I think that's where I think the research will show in the ACE report that financial abuse is one of the major forms, and often children to parents, sadly sons to mothers, but we've got to wait for that data. So I think there's important things that need to be done in terms of the Australian Law Reform Commission report recommendations. I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of education of people who are working with older people to know the signs and know where to go. I'd like to see more education of people who can actually cast their eye over it and say, I've seen this, people are being abused or somebody's having money taken from them. The banks, Meals on Wheels people, allied health professionals, staff in aged care, we've got to have them alert to elder abuse and know what they can do about it. So I think, and it's also about intergenerational programs and promoting those. So I think there are outcomes that need to come across the various areas, whether it's law, whether it's education, whether it's empowering people to call out ageism when they see it. And I just hope that those who are online today encourage others to join, to come to the conference. I mean, people were stunned at the last conference, there were 600 people. I hope we stun them and have over 1,000 people, either with us or online, to show to lawmakers, to show to the community that we are really serious about ageism. We're really serious about its effect and its worst effect, which is elder abuse. So what I guess is alerting the community would be my overall goal, that more people understand that elder abuse is in Australia, it's prevalent, but we need to all do something about it. That would be the message I hope people take away. But I want everyone to be there, a show of strength, that there are a lot of us who care about this issue and we can really make a difference.
Thanks so much, Kay. Yeah, I don't think anybody on this call or any of the speakers would disagree with anything that you just said. We also had a request for details on the Elder Helpline. The number that you can contact is 1800 353 374 if you're wanting to chat to someone and get some access to services in your jurisdiction. You can also go to compass.info and look up the support directory or the resources on that website. Look, it's pretty close to wrapping time, so I'd first like to thank everyone for a very interesting Q&A session, both in terms of the questions asked and comments made and by the panel. As I mentioned earlier, if there are any questions that we haven't sufficiently answered, then we'll certainly try and provide that information and circulate that to the forum's attendees later. The conference Walk the Talk Stepping Up Together is being driven by the program committee who are experts across a range of sectors, and they're part of a group that are just doing a tremendous job. And before I acknowledge them, I'm going to acknowledge Dr. Lynn McGurr, who's been working tirelessly developing the forum series with the program committee. Program committee members are Dr. Peter Cook, Professor Bryony Dow, Sue McGrath, Dr. Ray Caspiu, and Ms. Mary Patetsos. And I'm sure if Sue was on this call, she'd be suggesting that you do the Every Age Counts quiz on ageism, which someone else has mentioned in the Q&A. Really suggest you all do that. We at EAAA do that with any new contractors that come and start to work with us, and we think it's a really good place to start if you're new to this sector. On the program, on the working group for the committee is also Sue Leach and Dr. Lynn McGurr, myself and Russell Westacott, with Katie Roy joining us recently from EAAA. My thanks to each and every one of you for being here today. We've had more than 150 registrations, which is a great response that we hope will only grow for the remaining two forums in our series, the next of which will be the 15th of June, I should say, on World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. And we'll keep you updated with those details. I know I speak for everyone in our audience in thanking our brilliant presenters today, Sarah, Ian, John, Kay, and especially Kieran for giving up his Sunday night in Canada to be with us. I'm sure we look forward to seeing them all again in the conference in Hobart in February 2022. As it's been said by many before me, elder abuse and ending elder abuse is everybody's business. We need to walk the talk and step up together. Thanks so much, and see you on the 15th of June. Good afternoon.